this Tuesday night, new evidence in the Australian terror attack. Why police now believe the gunmen were inspired by the so-called Islamic State.
The vehicle, which is registered to the younger male, contained IEDs.
A new video showing the attackers being confronted by a couple in their 60s. Access denied.
An officer came up to me, screamed in my face, pushed me back into the wall.
Why a Canadian delegation, including MPs, was blocked from entering the occupied West Bank. Breaking news, charges laid in the Rob Reiner murder investigation, and new details from the night before he and his wife were killed. Plus, Canada's new grocery code of conduct, what it means for the industry and food prices.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We are learning more tonight about the gunmen responsible for Sunday's attack on Australia's Jewish community and the victims, including some who died trying to stop the massacre. Take a look at this new dashcam video showing a couple in their 60s, Boris and Sophia Gurman, confronting one of the gunmen. You can see 69-year-old Boris in the light-colored shirt tackling the shooter and wrestling his firearm away as they fall to the ground. His wife Sophia then runs towards him as they face off with the shooter. Sadly, the couple did not survive. The Gurmans were longtime residents of that community, about to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. That same dashcam video also appears to show the suspect's car with a flag of the so-called Islamic State. Redmond Shannon on the victims and the investigation.
A sea of flowers by the Pacific Ocean. Among the mourners, the Ukrainian parents of the youngest victim of the Hanukkah attack, 10-year-old Matilda.
This was not a surprise to the Jewish community. We warned the government of this many, many times over. We've had synagogues that have been graffitied.
Victoria Teplitsky's elderly father was shot and injured. She says the Australian government has been ignoring rising anti-Semitism. What is not being debated is that the father and son alleged attackers killed people simply for being Jewish.
The vehicle, which is registered to the younger male, contained IEDs, but I also confirm that it contained 2 homemade ISIS flags.
Police say Indian-born Sajid Akram and his son Naveen travelled to the Philippines last month. Australia's public broadcaster ABC reports the men attended a military-style training camp.
Very strong. Thank you very much. That is strong.
Australia's Prime Minister visited Ahmed Al-Ahmed in hospital Tuesday. The Muslim Syrian Australian who intervened Sunday, likely saving numerous lives.
It was a great honour to meet Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He is a true Australian hero. He's very humble.
Other examples of bravery involve people who were not so lucky, including Reuven Morrison and the Gurman couple, all killed Sunday evening.
There was people like running and screaming. So that's when I knew, there was something going on.
Canadian backpacker Finn Foster and his girlfriend were at Bondi Beach and had been due to attend a barbecue right beside the shooting.
We were thanking the person that canceled it. And, it wasn't on purpose that he canceled it. It was just, by accident.
Foster says they're still trying to come to terms with what happened. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A Canadian delegation, including 6 members of Parliament, had planned to visit the occupied West Bank today to meet with displaced Palestinians. But Israeli officials wouldn't allow it. Instead, the group was held at the border for hours by Israeli security and says that they were treated roughly before being turned away. As David Akin reports, they're now demanding answers from Israel's government.
30 Canadians, including 6 MPs, on a fact-finding mission to the West Bank and Jerusalem.
It's important for people to see what's actually happening in the region. So there were planned visits to Christian, Jewish, and Muslim households, civil society organizations.
But even though they had pre-cleared their travel with Israeli authorities, they were stopped at a border checkpoint between Jordan and Israel and held for 5 hours before being turned away. But not before one Canadian MP was roughly handled by Israeli security officers.
And an officer came up to me, screamed in my face, pushed me back into the wall. And then another officer joined him, and he also pushed me back, now this time into some carts.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has formally objected to the way MPs were treated. Israel's ambassador to Canada had no comment on the incident, but he said the delegation was denied entry because Israel alleges the group paying the delegation's travel costs, a registered Canadian charity called the Canadian Muslim Vote, was receiving funding from an entity listed in Israel as a terrorist group.
When they were getting to the border, they refused to cooperate with the Israeli authorities, and so we determined not to allow them in.
But one MP said he was paying his own way.
I'll be tremendously clear, I am paying for my own trip, and that is something that was long-standing.
And he said border officials never said why the MPs were turned away.
They absolutely did not, and we did ask.
The Canadian Muslim Vote said it was disgusted but not surprised by this smear campaign, and it says it has no international affiliations. Moreover, the Canadian Muslim Vote paid for a similar delegation last year with no incident. So what has changed in a year? Well, Canada, along with the UK and France, announced that it is prepared to recognize a state of Palestine, and that was a move denounced by the government of Israel. Israel's ambassador says that had nothing to do with it. Jeff.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thank you, David. The son of acclaimed Hollywood director Rob Reiner has now been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. 32-year-old Nick Reiner is accused of killing his parents, Rob and Michele, who were found stabbed to death Sunday in their Los Angeles home. Investigators are still piecing together what happened. Jackson Proskow reports on what we're learning about the hours leading up to their death.
The investigation into the murders of famed Hollywood icon Rob Reiner and his wife Michele has revealed disturbing new details. Both were found dead inside their home Sunday afternoon. The grisly discovery was reportedly made by their daughter Romy.
This case is heartbreaking and deeply personal, not only for the Reiner family and their loved ones, but for our entire city.
The Reiner's son, 32-year-old Nick, remains in this Los Angeles jail. He faces 2 charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances and is accused of using a knife as a deadly weapon.
No decision at this point has been made with respect to the death penalty.
The New York Times reports that the night before the murders, Nick Reiner attended a holiday party with his father, where his behavior alarmed guests. Witnesses say there was a shouting match between the two.
Well, I think I'm lucky in the sense that I have parents that care about me.
The father and son appeared on a podcast 10 years ago where they talked openly about the younger Reiner's struggle with addiction and homelessness.
Deep down, he trusted that we loved him and that we were there for him, and that put a little bit of a brake on certain things.
On the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a memorial to Reiner is growing. The ripples extend from the world of entertainment to politics.
Michelle Obama.
On Jimmy Kimmel Live, former First Lady Michelle Obama revealed she and former President Barack Obama had planned to see the Reiners the day they were found dead.
Let me just say this, unlike some people, Rob and Michele Reiner are some of the most decent, courageous people you ever want to know.
Nick Reiner has hired a high-profile defense attorney who has represented celebrities including Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey. It's expected the son of Hollywood royalty could be arraigned as soon as Wednesday. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
A second doctor has now been sentenced in California for his role in supplying Friends star Matthew Perry with ketamine. Dr. Mark Chavez will now serve 8 months of house arrest after pleading guilty in October to conspiracy to distribute the powerful anesthetic. Perry died of a fatal overdose in 2023. Chavez sold the drugs to another doctor, Salvador Plasencia, who then supplied them to Perry. Earlier this month, Plasencia was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. U.S. investigators are now offering a $50,000 reward for tips leading to the arrest of the Brown University shooter who killed 2 students and wounded 9 others in a mass shooting on Saturday. Police released these new images and surveillance footage that appear to show the suspect in a mask and dark jacket about 2 hours before the shooting. The FBI says he's about 5'8" with a stocky build. Investigators say campus security cameras failed to capture an image of the suspect's face. And turning to breaking news now, President Trump has just announced a complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. Trump also declared the Venezuelan regime a foreign terrorist organization. The move marks another major escalation of the U.S. campaign against President Nicolas Maduro, whom the White House accuses of sending drugs to the United States. And this new video shows U.S. missile strikes on 3 more alleged drug boats in the region. 8 people were killed. Those vessels were traveling a route used by narco traffickers, according to the Pentagon, but the U.S. has not released any evidence that they were actually carrying drugs.
This counter-drug mission, which is focused on dismantling the infrastructure of these terrorist organizations that are operating in our hemisphere, undermining the security of Americans, killing Americans, poisoning Americans. And this has been a highly successful mission that's ongoing and continued.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the Pentagon will not release the full video of another strike back in September that killed 11 alleged drug traffickers, including 2 survivors in a second strike. Toronto fire officials say they've never seen anything like it, but an apartment fire that has been smoldering relentlessly for nearly 3 weeks has finally been extinguished. Crews had been battling the fire at Thorncliffe Park in Toronto's East York neighborhood since November 27th. The fire was burning in the insulation inside the walls that smoldered like a cigar. A full assessment of the damage to the building and its 400 units is expected to take weeks. There's still no word on when residents will be able to return home. Boycotting Alberta, coming up. Why Skate Canada has decided to stop holding major events in Wild Rose Country. Skate Canada has announced it will no longer host major events in Alberta, citing provincial restrictions on transgender athletes. The national governing body for figure skating says following a careful assessment of Alberta's Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, Skate Canada has determined that we are unable to host events in the province while maintaining our national standards for safe and inclusive sport. The legislation, in effect since September, blocks transgender athletes who are 12 and older from participating in female amateur sports. Skate Canada's decision applies to both national and international level events. Alberta skaters are not barred from participating in any of those programs or competitions. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith responded late today, saying Skate Canada's refusal to hold events in Alberta because we chose to protect women and girls in sport is disgraceful. Her statement went on to say that we expect they will apologize and adjust their policies once they realize they are not only compromising the fairness and safety of their athletes, but are also offside with the international community. Canada's Grocery Code of Conduct is set to take effect on January the 1st. It's supposed to set the rules for what grocery retailers can charge suppliers, but some are questioning whether it will actually take a bite out of food inflation. Ann Gaviola explains the new rules and the potential impact on your grocery bill.
Toilet paper was a hot commodity in 2020. Finding a roll in aisle 5 was like winning a prize. But many smaller retailers were left out.
You couldn't find a roll of toilet paper to save your life in some of these smaller independent grocery stores, and that's because the supply was going to the large grocers.
The woman tasked with enforcing Canada's first Grocery Code of Conduct says the new rules for 2026 can level the playing field for smaller grocers and smaller suppliers. 4 years in the making, all the major retailers have agreed to the rules, with the exception of Walmart. Canada's big 5 grocers, Loblaw, Metro, Sobeys parent company Empire, Costco and Walmart control 80% of the country's market share. The UK implemented a mandatory code of conduct in 2010. Australia enacted a voluntary code in 2015 and switched to mandatory earlier this year. Now, in both of those countries, despite a concentration of retail grocers, food inflation remained well below 3% in the years following implementation. Though Canada's code isn't designed to keep a lid on consumer prices. So if you're hoping for relief on food inflation that's hiked prices by nearly 30% over the past 5 years, don't hold your breath.
This is going to be invisible to consumers.
The industry-led framework is designed to promote fair, ethical, and transparent commercial dealings across the grocery supply chain.
Farmers who are selling directly to the retail grocery stores. They stand to benefit from better relationships, clearer agreements.
Some grocery giants warned that an earlier draft would lead to more food inflation, but they've since changed their tune.
The grocers are now largely saying we don't think this will be inflationary, and that's because they changed the specific provisions. So the limits won't be as tight as perhaps we talked about at the beginning.
Ann Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
We have a glimpse tonight into Canadians' appetite for another federal election. An exclusive Ipsos poll done for Global News found that voters are split on whether another federal election should be held in the new year. 40% of respondents said Canada should head back to the ballot box in 2026, but nearly the same number of people said no. If an election were held today, the Liberals appear to hold a slight lead. 40% of respondents said they would vote Liberal. That's 3 points ahead of the Conservatives. Pollution solution still ahead. How the Liberal government is planning to reduce methane emissions. The federal government is tightening methane rules for oil and gas producers as well as Canadian landfills, aiming for deep emissions cuts over the next decade. Officials say the new regulations are one of the fastest ways to fight climate change, but critics argue they should go even further. Heather Yerkes-West looks at what's changing and why environmental groups say it misses the mark.
This is real climate action.
In its first major climate announcement since its pipeline MOU with Alberta, the federal government has rolled out new rules aimed at limiting the release of methane gas. Gas plants, oil and gas production sites, well sites and pipelines will need to meet stricter standards when it comes to limiting flaring and preventing leaks. But unlike previous regulations, companies will be given new flexibility as well.
They can choose a performance-based pathway that uses continuous monitoring and allows them to design their own solutions as long as they meet strong performance standards.
Landfills will also be regulated under the new rules, accounting for 17% of the country's total methane emissions. 150 landfills across Canada will soon be required to limit methane emissions.
They're definitely a positive step, which can deliver some of the cheapest and fastest emissions reductions that are currently available, but they do fall short of what is possible and necessary.
The new regulations will be phased in starting in 2028. For the last 5 years, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan have enforced their own methane regulations. And while BC has already negotiated a deal with Ottawa on a plan to reach further reductions by 2030, Alberta and Saskatchewan have more time. The MOU signed with Ottawa gives Alberta until April 1st to set regulations that will see methane emissions drop 75% by 2035.
The target that they're proposing is much further behind than what major oil and gas companies have already said is achievable. Companies like Shell, BP, Petronas, ExxonMobil, they've all committed to achieving near zero methane emissions by 2030.
The federal government says once implemented, the new rules will see Canada's total emissions drop by more than 400 megatons by 2040. For context, Canada's total emissions were just under 700 megatons last year. Heather Yerkes-West, Global News, Calgary.
The federal government has given the go-ahead to a proposed mining merger that could see billions of dollars invested in Canada, according to the industry minister. Canadian mining giant Teck Resources will now combine with Britain's Anglo American. The $53 billion deal creates one of the world's largest copper producers. The new company, Anglo Teck, will be headquartered in Vancouver, and it's promised that a significant majority of its senior management and board of directors will also be Canadian. The company has pledged to invest a minimum of $10 billion in Canada over the next 15 years. Sacred headdress. Up next, a precious piece of regalia is returned to its community. Well, take a look at this. Those are thousands of dinosaur footprints found on the side of a cliff in the Italian Alps. The prints were discovered in September and were created about 210 million years ago in the Triassic period, when a herd of ancestors of the Brontosaurus walked across a muddy surface. Scientists are using drones to study the footprints on the rock face. A sacred headdress worn by generations of Long Plain First Nation chiefs is finally back where it belongs. After decades in a museum collection, the regalia has been repatriated to the National Indigenous Residential School Museum, a move leaders call reconciliation in action. Iris Dick was there for its return.
A homecoming decades in the making.
Very emotional day, very proud to be part of it.
Long Plain First Nation councillor Randy Merrick receiving a headdress worn by his relatives, Chiefs Frank Merrick and Angus Merrick, who led the community from 1924 to 36 and 1975 to 76, respectively.
We went through our family pictures, found pictures of the headdress, and the beadwork is like unmistakable.
The sacred item had been stored at the nearby Fort Lorraine Museum in Portage la Prairie. It's not clear how it got there or exactly how long it had been there, but it's guessed a former chief gave it to them for safekeeping between 20 and 50 years ago.
I think it's great. I think more of this has to happen, and I think it brings a sense of pride back to the community.
And while the headdress was returned to the Merrick family, its new home will be here at the National Indigenous Residential School Museum. The building itself a former residential school which operated until 1975.
We felt it was better to have our museum hold it for the safekeeping of not only the family, but for our nation.
The headdress will be displayed at the museum, one of a number of historical items Executive Director Lorraine Daniels hopes to bring back to the community.
Today is a very significant day leading up to repatriating the sacred item, and this is just the beginning of returning sacred items to Long Plain First Nation.
She says it's reconciliation in action, something Merrick says his relatives would be proud to see.
If they could see this right now, they'd be smiling, like they would have pretty big smiles. They would be so happy that it actually happened and it's returned back home.
Iris Dick, Global News, Kishkimakwa, Manitoba.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is Calgary. We love to see your festive Canada photos, so please keep emailing them to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.